Hello, everybody, and welcome to the L&D Leadership League Twangout on Designing Strategic Conversations, a People Matters initiative in association with Center for Creative Leadership, Cornerstone on Demand, Northscape, Pearson Talent Lens, and Great Lakes Institute of Management. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Savita from People Matters, and I'll run you through a little about the league, and then we'll straight away move into the session. This is the second edition to the L&D Leadership League that we have. We will bring before you a set of activities that will give you an opportunity to ensure that each of us learns, shares, and grows throughout this journey. This year we have half-day conclaves, 30 minutes masterclasses, Twangout sessions like this one, annual conference which will be held in the month of November, L&D Leadership League Awards for the best of the best practices across industries, monthly newsletters, and updates on latest trends. Don't forget to miss this out and definitely be a part of the league, I would say. With this, I'd like to introduce you to our host for today's Twangout session. We have Anand Kasibatla, Assistant Vice President, Marsh India Insurance Brokers, a postgraduate in HR from XLRI, with diverse experience spreading across consulting and industry. He currently leads talent management initiatives with Marsh India and is a part of the Asia Talent Learning and Diversity team. Prior to this, he was working as a consultant with KPMG. Welcome, Anand. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Savita. Thanks for the nice introduction.
Our guest for the L&D Leadership League Twangout. He's a strategic thinker and a proven problem solver, and with a thorough understanding of a dynamic role with talent management that he plays, that he knows that is very crucial for the 21st century workforce. Join me in welcoming Kavi Arsu. Kavi is the Chief Manager Learning and Development Asian Paints. Kavi's role involves evolving the organization-wide people development agenda with the leadership teams in line with the organizational strategy and long-term plans. Before joining Asian Paints, Kavi has worked with MetLife India Insurance and Amway India. His roles have carried tags such as leadership development, learning and development, organizational development and change, facilitation, coaching, training, performance support, and consulting. A lot to learn from you, Kavi. Welcome, Kavi. It's a pleasure to have you.
Oh, thank you. It was a very, very generous introduction. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Before I request Anand to take over from here, let me remind you all to follow the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag #LNDLeague. That's #LNDLEAGUE. Please share your comments and post your questions so Anand and I can take it up with Kavi through the session live. For those not on Twitter, you can definitely inbox me your questions while I definitely encourage you to come on Twitter and join the conversation. So without being you and Kavi, I'll hand it over to Anand from here. Anand, shall we get started?
Yes, Savita, totally ready.
Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Savita. Really excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me to this Twangout and giving me the opportunity to host it. We are looking at an exciting next 45 minutes where we will be having some good conversation going on with Kavi. And just a reminder to all of you, you're watching the L&D Leadership League Twangout with Kavi Rasu, and hope you enjoy the same. Just a quick reminder again, tweet in your questions at #L&D League. Or in case you're not on Twitter, please feel free to drop in a mail to savita.vijayan@peoplematters.com. So quickly starting, Kavi, organizations have always been defined by the systems, strategy, process, policies, and the people that work in it. But organizations are much more than this. They are a microcosm of our society. They are a reflection of our community. So before we dig directly into our topic, just want to understand briefly about what is it that we need to look at it as an organization when we say how does it reflect our community?
Well, thank you, Anand. Thank you, Savita, and hello, everybody. Before I get started with the topic in itself, I just wanted to speak a little bit about A little bit of a context to the whole session for today. A is, you know, this is the first time I'm doing something like this. I'm told that there is something happening on Twitter. We are on Google Hangout, and there are going to be offline conversations that is getting streamed on YouTube. And then there is something called inboxing, which is happening. There's a whole heap of things happening. If there is one conversation which is triggering so much of digital presence, I'm immensely thankful to you guys. Thank you for doing something like this. But every layer that you add, please understand that you only increase the level of pressure for me. I'm just thinking, oh my God, it's on YouTube as well. Oh my God, something called inboxing as well is out here. So it's a little scary. And I've been off Twitter the whole of today. I've been in a series of meetings, and when I came out and I briefly glanced into my phone, I saw things like very generous people saying things like they're going to get pearls of wisdom from this session. I almost thought I would run away somewhere because you're not going to get any pearls of wisdom. But what I wanted to share today as a matter of sharing was a set of experiences that we have, a set of outlook perhaps that I hold close to my heart. What that naturally means is that these are not definitive proclamations saying this is the way it is. These perhaps are dilemmas that I have, challenges that I face, and probably an outlook in the context that we are in right now, in the context that I am in right now, where it's working, and therefore these are some thoughts that I'm sharing with you. And the reason why I lay this out up front is the fact that I would request all of us to slightly suspend our immediate context and try and imagine maybe that what I'm saying perhaps makes sense in some context, and maybe look at it with a slightly more inviting mode, because conversations are about invitations. Conversations are about deepening some kind of relationship, which will start with conversations. Now, so my goal here, as much as Savita mentioned all those nice things that People Matters is doing, and Anant mentioned all those nice things that he expects from the conversation, here are three expectations that I have. And these three are very clear and very simple. I'm going to share a few ideas and thoughts which are very close, very personal, and for you to introspect if it's at all correct, if it's true, if it's to be trashed, if it's to be saved for some later reading, whatever it is. I want to be very, very clear and conscious and very, very eager to listen to questions, if not now, maybe online later on. And third, if I leave, and if this conversation leaves people thinking about, if it provokes some thought, if it provokes some reflection, I think we've had a very productive day. So these are some of the three things that I have in mind. So there's nothing definitive. There are no pearls of wisdom, but we'll try and have a conversation. So this is 4 o'clock in the evening, approximately. So I think it's time for a coffee and a conversation. And there is nothing on earth like coffee and conversation, in my view. So some time ago, Anand brought this. Some time back, Anand brought this notion and the entire topic of communities. And I'm a great fan of communities. People who read my blogs, or people who hear my views often, will kind of hear these words repeatedly, which is conversations and communities. Communities are, in my view, the binding factors. It is the binding factor of society. So society is at large is a mixture of various communities which are there. Many years ago, a decade ago, I think, there was a gentleman by the name Erie DeGoss. He wrote a book called The Living Organization, or The Living Company, something to that effect. It's a beautiful book, and in that book, he wanted to specifically examine this entire idea of the organization as a community. And when you look at an entire organization, just not as a set of people who are coming together to achieve some goals and satisfy shareholders, but as a set of live beings who are coming together and be as a community, then you realize, all of us can realize easily, that bond for an organization to thrive as a community gets fostered by conversations. That becomes the binder of sorts. And therefore it's important, if you view an organization not as a set of dead processes running, but as a set of live conversations happening, as a set of live people working. Therefore, it becomes important for us to focus on what kind of connections exist for conversations to flourish. And therefore, for us to really view what kind of conversations can foster a community and what kind of communities can foster an organization and its health. Which is why I go back to my subject of why it's important to have good conversations and why is it important for us to ensure that conversations are important. I was speaking to a colleague of mine today morning, and he said very nicely that conversations are the veins, are the blood, is the blood that flows through and ensures that different parts of the body functions properly. And I so agree with that. If there is one least common denominator that can bind us all together in an organization, well, that's conversation. And therefore, the need for us to pay a lot of attention and importance to conversation itself. I'm sorry, Anand, it's a long answer to a very short question that you asked. But I just wanted to set the context, really. And this bit of pearls of wisdom was a little bit of a rankler. So I just thought I would set the context correctly about what kind of conversations we could expect today.
Thanks, Kavi. Thanks for the context. Now, just moving ahead with the discussion, what you rightly said is it's also about what kind of communities foster conversations and what kind of conversations can be brought up in what communities. So would you like to dwell upon that a bit on how do communities ensure that they foster the right kind of conversation within their realm?
You see, it is my view that when you have a community, when you have a live community, it is a natural community. Now, it is very easy for us to distinguish something dead and something very alive, and that applies to communities as well. When you start talking, or when anybody starts talking to a set of people, if it's a community, the feeling that it is a community can be easily understood and experienced. And if it's a very disparate set of individuals coming together to solve a problem or to create a problem or whatever it is, it's very simple for anybody to have a palpable sense of the fact that this is not a community, but it is a disparate set of people who come together to solve a problem or for whatever purpose. Now, there has to be a certain bind and a bond, and that is set by conversations. Now, having said all of that, you may start wondering, is there any difference at all between the regular conversations that happen in an office, in an organization, and what kind of conversations can happen in a community? Well, there are many kinds of conversations that happen, but in a community, the conversation is far more authentic. In a family, the conversation is far more authentic because there is no veil, so to speak, in front of the person when somebody speaks, because they speak because they know that they will be understood in the way in which they ought to be understood. And therefore, it's important for us to understand that authenticity, being true to what we are saying, keeping the other person in mind, all of this become forms of very important strands of being able to communicate properly. The other very important part of communication, which is so much a part of authentic communities, is the fact that people tend to listen a lot. In my opinion, the communities that I have seen flourish very well are communities that ask a lot of questions. Not ask a lot of questions that are sarcastic, or not ask a lot of questions that seem to put down, seem to doubt, but questions that are genuinely curious and genuinely curious about what answers come from there on. When I see any place which is bubbling with a lot of questions and not with definitive proposition saying this is the way it is, I see for a fact that there is a good chance that there is a community out there and not a set of individuals driving their own agenda. For me, if you ask me what is your one barometer for you to check the health of conversations in the community, I tend to look at what kind of questions are getting asked. If you go sit in a meeting, you understand what kind of questions are getting asked, what kind of conversations happen. And then you realize if there is going to be curiosity, if there's going to be authenticity, if people are really, really interested in knowing the answer, then you realize that there is a certain sense of bind and a bond. And that is fostered by conversations, which are usually said by questions. Yeah, I wrote a blog post some time ago, and the title of that was "Questions Are the Answers." And if we have more and more of questions that provoke curiosity, I think we are getting somewhere in a place.
Yeah, that's right, Kavi. It's an interesting point that you bring up about how communities outside of workplaces foster and human beings have much more honest and open communication in those places. Where it's interesting to note that every person spends an equal one-third of their life in those communities and one-third of their life in their organizations. So it is much more meaningful for people to ensure that they bring in that kind of a sense of community and communication back to the workplace, because the remaining one-third they sleep literally. So it's essentially these two halves that they need to bridge.
Yeah. 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 Go on.
Yeah, so going ahead with the topic, Kavi, so once we have talked about a lot of these communities which we are talking about where an honest communication is free flowing, it's also to do with the history that's behind these communities. There's a lot of time that has been invested to shape the communities in which they have been shaped so far. So when we come to an organization and we try to replicate this kind of a model, so what is it that some of the key things that we need to look at, and how do we ensure that we build up this community from within?
That's a good question. I go back to the original book of A.D. Degas, and you can anybody who's listening and is interested in understanding the origins of the theories and work around the learning organization must, in my opinion, read the work of A.D. Degas. He did some. He was he wrote a phenomenal book, in my opinion. He was with Shell, and his pronouncements were very, very solid. And when when you read the book, you realize a couple of things. One of the things that caught my eye was the fact that longevity of human beings is increasing. As in, earlier people used to live till 50, then it became 60, then it became 70, 80. Now maybe we just keep on adding a few years, just as medical advancements keep progressing. At the same time, longevity of organizations are falling. Companies that were there a while ago don't exist now. And there is a very interesting deepening of thought about how can people live longer, but people who live in the same people who work in organizations, but how the hell do organizations not live as longer? How come their longevities are coming down? And one of the facets of the answer was a sense of community. Now, there's a lot of research on this. And any organization with a sense of community, the chances of longevity of the organization are far higher. And therefore, the importance of us to foster that sense of community grows up significantly. Now, what does that mean? And that means especially in the modern times, especially in the ways in which people want to be included in conversations, especially in the ways in which people want direct, authentic communication instantly, it means a few things. It means we need to create the space for free-flowing conversation to happen, A. But more importantly, it means we need to create an atmosphere for conversation. Now, I'll give you a couple of examples. Now, traditionally in organizations, goal setting used to be top-down. Policies used to be top-down. And then sometime back, we realized that when it's top down, anything which is goals, which is policies, anything like that, when it's top down, there is a whole heap of selling which has to happen. I make a goal, and then I have to go down. I make a policy. I have to go down office after office and communicate this is the policy. But if you were to flip the coin, and if we were to, and here is a very important point, if we were to believe and trust in the competence of the people that work with us, in trust and believe in the faith that they have in the future of the organization, and if we entrust them as well, and if we onboard them in the co-creation of policies and goals and everything else, it becomes so much more easier, not only to communicate and ensure acceptance, but also for the richness of what we create. Now, what is this but conversation? Now, thus, in an organization, formally, there are many, many opportunities of conversation which are there. Your appraisal is a conversation. Your goal setting is a conversation. Your development is a conversation. These are all conversations. Now, how rich we would want to make them to be, or how poor we want to make them to be, is a choice that each one of us has. Now, the moment I make all these conversations very participative, inclusive, and at the same time directional towards the future of the organization and the individual concerned, it may sound ideal, but it's working. It's possible. The moment we do that, what we do to the individual and to the entire set of people working together is that we make them a community. And there is a shared sense and belief that this place is something to belong to. And that is very aspirational. That is very precious to create. Can I do it with 1 year? No. Can I do it with 2 people? Perhaps not. But can we do it over a period of time? Can we work towards it? Well, that's something to really, really work towards. And that's the trajectory that we are on. I've spoken a few things about a few aspects. Now, I spoke about why it's important to involve people. I spoke about why it's important to share and be authentic about communication, not only communication, about ways and means of doing things. It's about participation, and it's about increasingly about involving the people who will be holding the reins of the organization in the future, much, much earlier than we are used to giving. Now, these are elements of participation, and these are also elements of conversation. The last part we spoke of was every organization has tremendous amounts of conversation which are happening right now. These are in the garb of processes. The moment we stop seeing them as processes, but as an interaction with another human being, then we realize that there is scope for conversation, there is scope for richness in the conversation, and there is scope for some joy and happiness in the whole existence. The moment, I mean, I don't know of anybody who goes into an appraisal thinking, oh, what a fun time I'm going to have. But the moment you try and see if it's going to, if you're going to make it authentic, participative, and over a period of time, people at least don't fear an appraisal. People know, yes, it's another chat. Yes, it's another time to go sit down and express my points of view and hear the other person out. The moment we get there, I think we have a very healthy place, and I think we fostered something very nice for the future.
It's an interesting perspective that you bring in, Kavi, when you say things have historically been a lot of top-down, but we need to bring in a lot of more inclusiveness in bringing people together. But isn't it, so to say, ironical to say that most of these things need to be driven top-down, even to build a culture of collaborative communication? Until it's driven from top-down, the ecosystem below will not be able to imbibe that.
Well, you make a very important, interesting point. And I would partially agree, which means when you say that it is important for it to be driven top-down. I'm not sure if it needs to be driven top-down.
Okay.
While it's important for it to be seen and experienced by everybody, I'm not sure if it needs to be driven. I'll give you an example, and I'll tell you why I say that. I must see, if I am the leader of an organization, people must see me being authentic. People must experience me as being really invoking participation. People must see me as someone who's receptive to ideas that are very different from the ones that I had. At the same time, I must be that way, number one. But number two, more than me driving this, saying everybody must be this way, is when people start getting onto a podium and start communicating, driving this in this way. More than that, if I begin to live this, people start experiencing this. The moment people start experiencing this, they attempt to live it in a particular way. And soon, our experience has been that soon there is a significant mass which experiences this kind of life and living, and understanding that, oh, I think this is possible within this company. Well, if it's possible within this company, can we also try something like this? And therefore, it just expands and grows forward. Now, is it very idealistic? Is it something that happens only in a certain pocket and doesn't happen in all pockets? Yes, it's not. It doesn't happen in all pockets. But can it happen in 60, 70, 80% of the organization? That's a very good start. So we had a managing director with whom I used to go speak to often. And one of the things that he said was this: that I do not expect a large part of the organization to adopt this at one go. But even if small pockets adopt, and we start seeding and spreading stories about how it's being adopted and how well it's going on, the word will spread and people would want to take this up. Because there is an inherent need in each one of us to belong. And if we are offering that need some kind of solace, some kind of an opportunity for that need to flourish and to sprout and flourish, well, nobody is going to say no. And therefore, it's important for us to see and believe that it can work. If we do that, I think it works. Far beyond the worst fears of the worst skeptic, it works.
Okay, that's a very. It makes us feel a lot of happy because it's a new belief that's there, that such kind of an ecosystem can exist. Because most of us, we live in organizations where it's highly task driven. The conversations are also highly transaction oriented. We need to get certain things done. But it also brings about an interesting perspective of how do we make this story spread? How do we induce these conversations into the informal, not grapevine, or the informal learning systems that are present within the organization?
Yeah, so I would say that the start point would be whatever is working well with an organization. That's where the start point is. For us, the start point was we were very good at processes. Our processes were very robust, and therefore we said, if that's what is our calling card, maybe we should begin there and try and see what kind of conversations can these processes foster. Because people love when we put it as a part of process. People love it, and therefore we said, if that's a Trojan horse of sorts, then we'll write that. And I'm sure every organization has a Trojan horse of sorts. Every organization has a path, a methodology, which they're very, very good at. And I think it's for each one of us to think about which part of the organization, which part of the Trojan horse you would want to climb. So for us, for instance, processes were very good. So we said, if we are good at processes, and if processes are going to define us in some form, can we start by making the making of processes very inclusive? So if it's about designing an appraisal system, for instance, appraisal systems are not designed by HR people with us. What does that mean? That means line managers come together, sit with us, and then design the appraisal system. They say we have a big fight about relative rating versus absolute rating. But it's not our opinion. We have an opinion, we have a stance, but it is fought and it is agreed and it's discussed. More importantly, there are many rounds of conversations which happen before one view is taken finally. Now it starts from there. If we're very good at process, making of the process become inclusive, making of the processes become very, very conversational. It starts from there. Now, the moment you make process making conversational, then process adoption becomes even more conversational. And then process following becomes even more conversational. So you don't run back with a score. You don't run back saying we got only 70%, we got only 80%. We go back to the guy from line, or they come back to the guy from HR who's sitting there saying, excuse me, I don't think this part is working. Let's talk about it. Now, in that kind of an atmosphere, I know that the other person's stake in the success of what we're doing is as much and as high as what we have, and as much as his goals, the process that we are running, the process that we collectively are running, all our hands are there as stakes, and therefore it makes it so much more richer. So therefore, sum and substance, in my opinion, I think we should identify what the organization is good at and try and see if that can become the Trojan horse to foster conversation. If you're good at innovation as a company, if you're good at customer service as a company, if you're good at whatever it is, it's good to take that as the vehicle to foster more and more and more conversations before we get to areas where we don't agree or we're not so good at it.
That's really interesting. Just an add-on to that, Kavi. So once we have started these conversations flowing in an organization, does an organization also needs to make a deliberate effort towards repositioning or rebranding its own existence as a free-flowing community rather than an organization itself, or still within the bounds of all the policies, processes, and strategy and systems and goals, this can sustainably exist, this sort of a free-flowing conversation?
Well, I'm not a great fan of labels or of branding and stuff like that. Just me again. I would request you to go back to my earlier premise, the earlier comments with which I started the whole thing. This is me. And please take whatever I say with not just a pinch of salt, but with a large jar of salt. Therefore, what I think in these things is, as much as it's important to rebrand it, I'm not sure if we should run it as a communication initiative as much as we should run it as a very practical, demonstrated way of being. Now, if I am having these conversations, if employees are experiencing these conversations, if there is enough or more avenues for participation for employees on a variety of things, so that solves my problem. Now, the moment I run communications around it, saying, okay, here I'm going to stand up and communicate to you about you being participative, that's one way of doing it. But the other way is to ensure that there is enough or more opportunities created for people to actually participate. And the moment we create lots of avenues for people to actually participate, actually communicate, so we sit down and listen to them, and they sit down and listen to us, and both just not listen but act on whatever we have listened to, then there is no need for a formal communication to happen, because people are experiencing it already. Now, that, in my opinion, is a form of a living organization, where you do not have a sweetener for a pill, but you eat very healthy. When you eat healthy food, you don't need sweeteners and pills. That's the analogy that I would give you. And it's very tough. While I make it sound very simple and very easy, it is not easy. It is tough and it takes time. And over a period of time, we build this richness in diet. Now, anybody who's gone through a dieting regimen will tell you how tough it is. It is tough, and over a period of time, you understand the richness of the food that's important is not really sophisticated food, but simple food, and that simplicity in itself is sophistication.
Correct.
That's what I'm getting at. If we have simple conversations sans labels, if we have simple conversations sans measures to measure a means rather than the end, then suddenly the means become the objective. And therefore, for us to really focus on what is the actual problem and how can we address the actual problem. And that's where I'm focused on. That's where all of us ought to be focused on. That's what we are in business for, in my opinion. And therefore, Anand, to address your question, communication must be a way of living it. People must experience it, and that's the communication, best form of communication. Having said that, the last piece that I would like to add is some of us will happen to do it far better than anybody else. Now, we have to find means and ways of fostering these stories across the organization. That's some work to do. How can we ensure that this person who's speaking to the other person in a particular way, which is so rich and which involves so much of participation, how can we ensure that those stories percolate largely one-on-one conversation? How can we do that? That is something to be thought about. That is something that is very contextual to every organization.
Yeah.
We have a ways of doing it, but I'm sure every organization will find its own ways and means of doing it.
Correct. I totally resonate with you, Kavi, there that some of these things need to be more intuitive in how an organization goes about doing these things in certain areas where branding might work out, whereas in certain areas, people, it totally depends on the kind of, again, the community that an organization is. Yeah. So I would
That's
just
correct. That's correct.
remind. So I'll just remind all people who have tuned in to please do send in your questions at hashtag LND League, or if you're not on Twitter, please do send in your questions at savita.vijayan, savita.vijayan at peoplematters.com. We'll be shortly taking questions from everybody, and Kavi will be more than happy to answer all of them. Just to add a dimension to this, Kavi, with the increasing spread of virtual teams and cross-cultural teams and cross-geographical teams, what is the level of challenge or complexity that's added to developing this whole process of free-flowing conversations?
That's a very, very interesting question that you asked. It is tough, but I think it is. When I say it is tough to start. But the real benefit of this is that it is simple. The moment, irrespective of the culture, the moment somebody realizes that the other person has my interests also in mind while speaking to me, strangely I find cultural barriers just fizzle away. That's number one. Number two, there is another beautiful thing that I often find, which is the power of stories. Whichever culture that I have seen people come from, the moment you start narrating a story, people get captivated. People want to listen to the story. And therefore, the importance of being able to tell good stories, of being able to curate good stories, and being able to escape labels, which may mean different things in different cultures. But people understand stories far better than labels. The moment I say I attach a label to a story and say, and often because of our interest in speeding up things, we start using labels. But we have to understand that those labels, those very labels, have very different connotations in different cultures. And therefore, for me, when interacting with different cultures, desisting from labels and diving into stories solves many problems on conversations. It means spending a lot more time. It means spending far more holistic time, far more deep time. But the bonds that form are something phenomenal, are really phenomenal over a period of time. When we have an acquisition that a merger and acquisition that was happening some time ago, part of the integration story was about let's sit down and talk to each other about each other's stories. That was it. So there were a set of people from this side speaking about, you know what, these are things that have happened, like how you would discuss in a cafe, sitting down with a cup of coffee and saying, you know what, something happened like this, and this is us. And the other side sitting down and saying, you know what, something happened like, oh, these were your experiences, these are my experiences. And then in that exchange of stories, you realize that that is the culture and that is the value that's very dear to both these sides. We didn't use a single presentation. There were no slides. There were no question of putting down a set of things saying these are our values. These are nothing. It was just a sharing of stories from both sides. Now you see, the idea is we are all very very fond of stories. Somewhere in our corporate lives we kind of missed it, and we are trying to see if we can rekindle the essence of life and living, which is to share, which is to talk, and which is to share stories with each other. Um, the Clue Train Manifesto, in almost every interaction, I keep speaking of this book, hoping that more people will go pick up the book and read. Um, has a very interesting start to the book, where they say in olden ages, people used to converge around markets. Whenever there were traders who used to go across the high seas and go into a particular market, people used to flock to the markets. Part of it was to find out what kind of goods have they brought from far away lands which they didn't have any perspective about. But more importantly, to sit down and talk to the sailors and talk to the merchants to figure out how is life in a distant place, to sit down and listen to stories from a different place. Now, all of us need to, and all of us have this great inner need to listen to stories. And if only we rekindle that need a little bit, life will be so much more better.
Oh, that's an interesting perspective. I think stories are a genesis of our entire civilizations. That's from where conversations start. Once we start telling stories that mean something to people, that resonate with people, that's where the instant connect happens and the community bond is strengthened. We have a question coming in from Pallavi Sharma. She's asking, when we talk about having these strategic conversations, how do we look out at diplomacy? I think to reiterate or to expand the questions, how do we ensure that diplomacy or tact are not, people are not doing it just for sake of diplomacy, but actually engaging in these conversations?
Okay. I can understand part of the question, but I'll try and see if I can answer the other side as well, which is being authentic sometimes means you aren't so diplomatic. Being authentic means one just is. If I am angry and if I am annoyed with somebody who's perhaps not done it well, in my conversation there is going to be a little bit of a rough edge. That's part of life. In family circumstances, if I do something wrong, my wife will have a very good conversation with me. You know what that means. There is no diplomacy there. There is no wheel of sorts, and that is natural. In organizations, somehow we've created this notion that we have to have a sense of calm on the surface, and then we can bottle down all our feelings, and we have to be nice to each other, or at least that's the perspective that I get often. I think in organizations as well, part of having authentic conversations is to be able to weather rough conversations. That's being part of being authentic. Now, the beauty of this is I'm not being rough or acerbic to hurt. I'm being rough because I'm hurt, because I need to express myself. The moment if both of us are having that kind of conversation, you're angry and you're upset and you're acerbic, I know that Anant doesn't mean ill, but Anant is upset about this. The moment that distinct is there, it doesn't matter to me as to what you say. I'm really concerned about what your intent is. When that intent is pure, and that's the sense of being in a community. I know my friend here is angry and is upset with me, and he's going to shout at me, but I know also that he has a right to do that because I did this mistake. Or he doesn't have a right to do that because he's actually wrong. And that's where conversations foster. So therefore, in my view, diplomacy is slightly further down the road. What's most important is trust. What's most important is an implicit understanding that the other person means well for me as well. The moment that's there, diplomatic or otherwise, really doesn't matter as much. But of course, there are lines that need to be well respected, and I'm sure when I mean well, I will not cross that line as well. I hope that answers Pallavi's question, but
I hope it does. And there was a follow-up question from Prasanna Shivkamath also, which was a similar question in terms of how do we deal with our personal fears and apprehensions when we have some of these conversations in organizations. So I think even to that question to some extent has been answered in this question.
yeah.
Anand Justin Cherian. Sorry, yeah. So Anand Justin Cherian from Incubix Consulting wants to know, how do you balance these opposing imperatives of consciously creating an environment of conversation, which is a tacky HR style, versus allowing an ecosystem to evolve organically, which is the completely blue sky?
Wow, okay, tacky HR style. Okay. Well, I'm just still recovering from tacky HR style. Well, I think what's important is HR, non-HR line. All of that is meaningless as long as all of us in the room understand that we have a role to play towards an end to be achieved. Okay. And each of our styles may be different. And as long as all of us are concerned about towards that end, we're going to do XYZ this year, or maybe in this time frame, and in the next time frame. One's not really concerned about this is the style that needs to be followed. And therefore, and this brings me back to the earlier proposition that I made, the earlier invitation that I was requesting all of us to have, which is to see if we can move away from labels. If we can move away from our fields of expertise. Now, expertise is important. HR expertise is important. IT expertise is important. Sales expertise is important. But in the modern day scenario, if we need to function as a community, what's important is to go beyond that expertise and to see how that expertise can be contextually applied to me. So if I am a good HR guy, which I would make a claim to. Now, if I am one, then I don't just maintain my level of expertise and say I'm a good HR person, but I try and see how much of it can be contextually applied. That means several times I have to move away from language that's so familiar with me. I have to move away from trying to see this is mine, this is the way it should be done. I have to be willing to see if this is what suits the purpose of this business at this time. I'm willing to flow with whatever you folks say within these boundaries. Now, the moment there is give and take, there is blue sky. And there is no one way of doing it. And I think the quest should be towards blue sky, but the flight towards the blue sky will be through the mode that's most comfortable to that organization. Now, if the organization in itself is to quote the gentleman's expression, if the organization is repulsive of tacky HR style, maybe tacky HR style shouldn't be followed. But if the organization is very accepting of tacky HR style, maybe tacky HR style must be followed. But the means, these are all means. What's more important is the end. And the end is if it's a rich future, whether it's up in the sky or down in the deep blue sea, I think that's what matters. It doesn't matter what style will get us there. What's important is what do we all agree, and even if it's going to be not 100% agreement, what can we all see for each other in this journey, and how can we work towards that? It may seem a little elevated. I'm not getting into operational specifics because it's going to be different for different organizations and different contexts. And that's the only reason why I'm not speaking very specifically. Okay, so maybe going ahead, I can give you a few examples and then maybe that'll help you understand this a little better.
Coming back, I know you don't like labels, but since the topic of HR has come, to build this community and to get these conversations flowing, there is some amount of learning or some amount of skill that needs to be brought into the organization to be able to have these conversations. So, without putting a tag or label to it, what is the role of a learning and development team in the organization to ensure that this kind of whole environment is created?
Okay. I hope you'll continue talking to me because yeah, I don't like labels, but it's not such a bad thing. It is a good thing. Everything is a good thing until such time that it gets used beyond its means, beyond its necessity. That's when it starts hampering work in itself. In my opinion, L&D is in a very, very unique position, and that position is it has a ringside view of business and business outcomes. That is extremely unique and precious to L&D. Now, this, of course, I'm speaking from my context. What does that mean? That means at one level, we are able to have conversations with multiple businesses and try and see what their contexts are, what their challenges are, what their problems are. And we try and see how can we resolve those, how can we help them resolve their challenges and their problems. Now, when we try and do that, what happens is you have, or we get to have a ringside perspective of different things that are happening in the system. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, Kavi.
Yeah, so okay, fine. Now suddenly my screen blanked out, so I wasn't sure.
Okay.
Okay, fine. So therefore learning and development teams, whichever organizations we work for, the moment we move away from or move just far more than just organizing programs, but start really partnering with business HR managers and all our team members across the organization, we realize that we can add a lot of value by just ensuring we create platforms for conversations. The moment we start saying, okay, here is a platform, here is a meeting where we're all going to come together and A, B, C, Mr. A, Mr. B, Mr. C from businesses X, Y, Z are going to come together and talk to Mr. D, E, and from this other business, and we're going to talk about this particular problem. Now, the moment we start doing that, there is a lot of fertilization, of cross-fertilization of ideas that are happening. There is no external body coming and telling me what my problem is, but there is an internal richness of ideas that are getting generated from within. We state, I think you should be working on this way. This is how, in our context, it works well. Now, that kind of stuff is perfectly possible by learning and development teams. For instance, we had an internal team where we were speaking to about a particular business need that they had. While we were talking to them and understanding how we can further the needs, we were simultaneously talking to some other businesses within the organization about some of the other challenges that they had. And then we realized that one function's challenge was the other function's answer. And all we had to do, instead of bringing somebody from outside trying to tell each function, we just had to bring these two functions together and say, guys, you know what? You have a product, guys, you have a problem. Let's sit down together and understand how you can sell your own problem, your product within. And that was the end of it. Now, for instance, all our negotiation skills stuff is anchored by people within. If you have a purchase team and if you have a sales team, nobody can teach you better negotiations than these people. Now, can we ensure that there is enough conversations happening for these people to come and share their ideas, their opinions, and the ways in which they do business? And there is so much richness, so much context in the way in which businesses get done. And these can be facilitated by learning and development. That's one. The second larger part of it that I really want to talk about is learning and development teams are now of course, the narrative has moved to how we can be very good curators of good content and stuff like that. What's also important for learning and development teams going forward is how much of good curators of good stories we can be. I think we are privy to so many stories happening across the organization that if only we are able to harness those stories and put it in a place and make it available for people to access it at their times of need, I think we can do a fair distance as far as fostering this environment is concerned. I'll give you one example. I've spoken about it before, but I'll give it to you again here. We have something called Pulse. What we do is to go before business leaders, sit down, talk to them, understand what kind of and hear their stories. And even as we hear their stories, there is someone writing those stories down. And every week, there is one story which gets published. Now, when you publish a story about anybody in the system, there is a certain level of expectation about what's the next story, whose story is it going to be next. And then sometime about a couple of months ago, people converted those stories into very nice cartoon strips. So cartoon strips started appearing, and people's interest in the story over a period of time has meant that there is a fair understanding of how another business functions, how another challenge is there, and we are able to do this largely because we are equidistant and we have very good relationships with different functions going forward. When you have good relationships, not because there are relationships, but because their problems are getting solved working with us, that's why there is a beautiful opportunity for people coming together and working on things. And we have, because of the ringside position rather, it's easier for us to facilitate these things. And therefore, the learning and development role is not only curating content, but also about curating cultures, and that is possible through curation of stories and curation of conversations by themselves. Can happen online, can happen offline, but one of my goals is to see how much of offline conversations can we foster using online content as well. So if we can do a bit of a balance between offline, online, and if we can scale it up in a particular way, there is a lot of opportunities for conversations to get fostered, and learning and development plays a very vital role in the whole process.
Thank you, Kaveri. I think I will start some of these things in my organization immediately to get the stories and the conversations flowing. With that, I would really like to thank you, Kavi. This has been a really enriching and an exciting and an energizing conversation that we have had. Thank you for making time. Hope our listeners have been able to get some pearls of wisdom from this conversation and are able to implement some of these in their organizations.
Well, if you got a story or two to go tell, go think about, that's fine. If it's wisdom or a pearl, I, I would leave it to them. What I'm really interested in is to continue the conversation online,
yes,
of this medium as well. If People Matters has been able to put together this kind of a Twangout. The first time I heard Twangout, I said, "What the hell is that?" So it's very interesting to see how much of imaginative space that can be created out of mediums that are rather straightforward. If People Matters has been able to do that, I think the imperative for all of us will be to see how we can sustain.
I think we have lost Kavi there.
yes.
I'm sure Kavi is going to join us back in a second or two. Till then, thank you so much, listeners, for being a fantastic audience to the L&D Leadership League Twangout that we've had today. With this, we come to an end of a super exciting L&D Twangout, and we definitely want to thank Kavi. Let me see if he's back. A very big thank you, Kavi. I think we have just lost him. A very, very big thank you, Anand. You have been a fantastic co-host. Thank you so much for being there.
Thank you, Savita. Thanks for the opportunity, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Hope you were able to gain something out of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you soon with yet another interesting topic next month. And please feel free to visit our peoplematters.in to register for the same. We look forward to welcoming you all once again. As we close for today's Twangout session, I'd definitely like to wish you a very, very good evening and an inspiring day ahead. Thank you so much.